Okay, this project I really loved. The time travel project. Our task was to imagine ourselves in a different time as an artist and what type of work we might do or what we might not be able to do. We were allowed to choose our time and era that we wanted to go back to. And I decided that I wanted to travel back to the 1980s and become one of the foundings, one of the founders of the Craftivism Sisterhood, the Guerrilla Girls, formed in New York City in 1985 with the mission of bringing gender and racial inequality into focus within the greater arts community. And this is some of their, this is their subversion. They're pretty famous for this type of art, really, that they collectively make. Rather than adopting an alias, an existing alias, I chose to make one for myself in New York City in 1985. I chose this era because given the slow rate of progress, I didn't want to venture too further back in time. I felt that 1985 was far back enough. And though we're moving forward, there's a long way to go before we achieve real and lasting equality. Pseudonyms are generally based on dead female artists such as Catherine Kolowitz, Alma Thomas, Rosabella Carrera, Frida Kahlo, Alice Neal, Julia de Burgos, and Hannah Hoch. And some more. My alias, Francesca Woodman. She was best known for her black and white photographs featuring herself and various models. Francesca died of suicide in New York City on January the 19th in 1981. She jumped off a building and died before she became famous and known as an iconic photographer. She's recognised as today. I chose her because I really loved her photography and it inspired a collection of new body paintings that I did in the first semester where I just flopped around and experimented with movement on paper, and despite the mess, I found a really empowering experience. I was really pleased with the conclusions and resulting work. It was not just inspired by Francesca's work, I also was saddened by her struggle to find an arena in which she could shine or happiness in her personal life. As a person with borderline personality disorder, I often experience lows. Though I've been lucky to have had friendships, children and family to support me and get me therapy and rehab. This is my research of New York. And before it became a tourist attraction, Times Square was an eclectic mix with legendary grand but slightly run-down theatres, an ever-evolving moral-filled and increasingly bolder adult entertainment industry, and the anything goes decade itself. It was an intoxicating experience, dangerous but always entertaining. Times Square was like no other place in the world. And street art and subway art in the late 1970s and 80s signalled the beginnings of street and graffiti art. New York in the 1980s was an altogether different city from the one we know today. Homicides were at near record highs, the crack epidemic, the AIDS crisis. Outside of Harlem and Bryant Park and Times Square got the nickname Needle Park. Times Square was full of peep shows, adult video stores, effectively becoming the epicentre of the sex industry. In the 1980s, New York City was turbulent and crime-ridden, nasty reputation for violence and filth and fear. From trash to luxury, the meatpacking district became really expensive place, but there was also a lot of drugs there. And here I just have some visual aids of these things. You know, it's very, very unrealistic view of women. You know, we were being objectified and photographed, you know, like that. Drugs in New York. I looked at the UK in the 1980s as well, and there was some significant differences. You know, we had very different social issues. Some were similar. Drugs were a problem for us then as well, you know, in the UK. Long established industries were dying out. The miners' strike was a major industrial British action. It was, you know, affected lots of families, mine included. Fashion changed. It was all shoulder pads, dramatic makeup, shell suits, scriptures, lots of gold jewellery. The 1980s in London was a decade of considerable change. The stock market collapsed and we entered an economic depression. House phones became commonplace. Music was changing. Ska, punk, electro. Feminism was growing. You know, and Diane Abbott, who we know from the Labour Party, was leading this movement at that time. She was the first woman of colour to have a seat in the House of Commons. She made history being black and coming from a working class family. Her father was a welder, her mum was a nurse. She went to Cambridge University to study history in the 1970s, and she was, in 2017, only 15 black students attended. Diane worked for the Home Office in 1976, and she was so smart they helped her to further her career. And here are my little flashcards that I made for this project of fashion and the hair and jewellery and the type of get-up that was seen. The films, my favourite 80s films, so the things that influence people, and the music, some of my 80s music that I like. And this is the UK, Diane Abbott, you know, shut up shops everywhere, you know, very run down. And I have a flashcard for now, where we have smartphones and stupid people who watch television shows about people watching television shows. And this year, the pandemic, social distancing, it's been, you know, crazy, and our lives now revolve even more around apps because we're using them more than ever for our day-to-day lives.